could forgive the spending. I could maybe forgive the lies. But when I saw that food delivery notification for a downtown rental, I went scorched earth. The rain in the Pacific Northwest doesn't fall, it hammers. It's a constant gray static that tries to erode everything you build. August 14th, 2024, 10:15 p.m. I was sitting inside the cab of my Cat 336 Excavator, suspended in the dark. The world outside was nothing but a cone of yellow floodlights, cutting through the driving rain and the black mud of the subdivision site. The engine thrummed beneath me, a deep, vibrating bass note that I felt in my teeth. It's a rhythm. If you work the machines long enough, your heart starts beating in time with the diesel. My hands rested on the joysticks. They're stained. It doesn't matter how much Gojo orange scrub I use or how hard I scour them with a bristle brush. The hydraulic grease and the earth have worked their way into the dermal layer. My knuckles are scarred maps of every job site I've ever cleared. 2 more hours, I muttered to the glass. 2 more hours and the mortgage is clear for the month. I paused the bucket mid-swing, the hydraulics hissing as they held the weight of a ton of wet clay. I reached for my thermos. The coffee inside was lukewarm and tasted like metal, but the caffeine was the only thing keeping the edges of my vision sharp. I looked at the photo taped to the safety glass, right next to the load chart. Leo, 10 years old, grinning with a plastic soccer trophy that cost $5, but meant the world to him. Maya, 7, with a gap-toothed smile that broke my heart every time I looked at it. They are the reason I pick up the graveyard shifts. They are the reason Vance Excavation and Hauling LLC exists. I'm not building a bank account. I'm building a wall between them and the poverty I grew up in. I pulled my phone out. The screen was bright in the dim cab. Running late. 1 more load. Kiss the kids for me. I hit send. The message bubble turned blue. Delivered. I waited. The rain drummed against the roof. 10 seconds. 30. A minute. No 3 dots. No love you. Just the silence of the cab and the ticking of my chronograph watch. It's an expensive watch. Too expensive for a guy who digs holes. But I bought it to remind myself that my time is worth something. I set the phone down. She was probably asleep, or watching one of those reality shows where people scream at each other over dinner. 11 p.m. My mind drifted to the house. 404 Ironwood Drive. Most people see a 2-story colonial with nice siding and a manicured lawn. I don't. I see the framing, the foundation, the load-bearing walls. I see the paperwork. Back in 2015, when I started the company, I didn't just buy a house. I sat down with Elias Mercer, my attorney, and we structured the purchase through the LLC. We utilized zoning variance 44B. To the neighbors, it's a home. To the county tax assessor, it's a light industrial/commercial mixed-use property. It allowed me to legally park the rig in the back lot and write off the square footage as office space. It was a fortress. A tax-advantaged, liability-protected fortress designed to keep my family safe. I smiled, a grim tightening of my jaw. Jessica hated the paperwork. She called it boring legal mumbo-jumbo. She just wanted to pick out the curtains. I let her pick the curtains. I handled the structure. You don't ask the painter about the foundation. 11:43 p.m. The vibration of the engine changed pitch as the compressor kicked on. Then, the cab lit up with a harsh blue glow. It wasn't my phone. It was the iPad mounted to the dashboard. I use it for site schematics, load logs, and invoicing. It's synced to the family cloud account so I can approve app purchases for the kids. A banner slid down from the top of the screen. Grub Root, your order from Kaito Sushi has been delivered. I frowned. I wiped a smudge of grease off the screen with my thumb. I hadn't ordered sushi. I was eating a ham sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil that had been sitting on the dashboard heater since noon. I tapped the notification. Order total, $142. My stomach dropped. It was a physical sensation, like the excavator slipping on loose grade. $142 for dinner. Jessica hates sushi. She says the texture of raw fish makes her gag. She won't even eat a California roll. I stared at the screen. The logic didn't fit. A glitch? A hack? Then I saw the delivery map. The pin wasn't at 404 Ironwood Drive. It was downtown. The little car icon had stopped at the corner of 4th and Main, the Skyline Lofts. I zoomed in. The delivery notes were specific. Penthouse 4. Leave at door. Do not knock. The air in the cab suddenly felt thick, heavy with the smell of diesel and wet wool. I couldn't breathe. My brain tried to reject the data. Maybe she ordered it for a friend. Maybe her account was compromised. But the tip was exactly 20%. Jessica always tips 20%, even when the service is bad. She says it's bad karma not to. Hackers don't worry about karma. Mistake, I whispered. My voice sounded jagged. It's a glitch. August 15th, 2024, 12:15 a.m. Denial is a structural defect. It compromises the integrity of the whole system. You have to cut it out. I minimized the Grubroot app. My hand was shaking. I watched my own fingers tremble, thick, scarred fingers that can manipulate a 10-ton boom with millimeter precision. And I hated them for showing weakness. I opened the family tracking app. We installed it last year when Leo started riding his bike to school. Safety. That's what we called it. I zoomed out from the construction site. Leo's icon, a little blue shield, was at 404 Ironwood Drive. Stationary. Maya's icon, a pink flower, was at 404 Ironwood Drive. Stationary. Jessica's icon was a selfie she took on our anniversary. She was smiling, her head thrown back, laughing at something I'd said. That icon wasn't at home. It was pulsing softly at the Skyline Lofts. I shut down the excavator. The silence that rushed into the cab was violent. The rain hammered against the glass, louder now without the engine to fight it. I pulled up the browser on the iPad. My fingers felt clumsy, thick. I typed, Skyline Lofts Penthouse 4 owner. Public records are slow. The county auditor's site loaded bar by bar. I felt a cold sweat breaking out under my collar, mixing with the grime on my neck. I didn't get a name immediately, but I got the leasing page. Penthouse 4, 2,500 square feet, floor-to-ceiling glass, private elevator access, monthly lease, $8,500. I looked at the time on the sushi delivery again. 11:40 p.m. She wasn't eating alone. You don't order $142 of sushi for one person, and you don't eat it in a bachelor pad downtown while your husband is working a double shift in the mud, unless you have destroyed the contract of your marriage. A crackle on the site radio made me jump. Vance, you clear on the South Ridge? Concrete trucks are rolling at 6 a.m. It was the foreman, Mike. I cleared my throat. It felt like I had swallowed broken glass. Yeah, cleared and graded. I'm packing up. My voice was flat, monotone, good. Copy that. See you tomorrow. I am Frank Vance. I own Vance Excavation. I solve problems. I don't panic. Panic is for people who don't have a plan. I took a screenshot of the Grubroot order. I took a screenshot of the GPS location. I saved them to a folder on the iPad labeled Site Photos. Then I climbed out of the cab into the rain. 1:30 a.m. I was sitting in my pickup truck now. The heater was blasting, but I couldn't get warm. The cold was inside my bones. I held my phone. I opened the mobile banking app. I have access to everything. I'm the one who balances the books. Jessica never looks at the accounts. She says numbers give her a headache. She just swipes the card. I filtered the transaction history. Dining/entertainment. Last 6 months. The screen filled with data. The Vine Wine Bar, $84.50, July 12th. Le Petit Bistro, $120, July 19th. Downtown Valet, $35, July 19th. Cinema Lux, $45, August 2nd. I checked the dates against my work calendar. July 12th, I was fixing a busted hydraulic line on the excavator until midnight. July 19th, overnight shift at the quarry. August 2nd, emergency call out for a mudslide on Route 9. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. A structural failure that had been widening for months while I was too busy keeping the roof over our heads to notice the foundation was rotting. I felt a hard, cold knot form in the center of my chest. It wasn't heartbreak. Heartbreak is hot. It burns. This was cold. This was calculation. She was using family funds, my sweat equity, to finance her audition for a new life. I tapped the steering wheel. Tap, tap, tap. Okay, I said. Okay. 5:15 a.m. I pulled into the driveway of 404 Ironwood Drive. The house was dark. The streetlights reflected off the wet pavement. It looked perfect. The siding was clean. The landscaping I put in last spring was thriving. It looked like the American dream. I felt like an intruder. Jessica's SUV was in its spot. I walked over and touched the hood. Cold. She'd been back for hours. She probably slipped in around 2 a.m., checked on the kids, and scrubbed the sushi off her breath. I unlocked the front door. The house smelled like lemon pledge and fabric softener. It smelled like a lie. I took off my boots in the mudroom. I placed them on the rubber mat, perfectly aligned. I hung my wet canvas jacket on the hook. I didn't slam anything. I didn't scream. I walked down the hall. The floorboards didn't creak. I fixed that squeak 3 years ago. I pushed open the door to the master bedroom. On the blueprints I filed with the county, this room is labeled Corporate Office Suite B. It's where the manager sleeps. Jessica was there. She was curled under the white duvet, her breathing deep and rhythmic. Her hair, that expensive honey blonde she spends a fortune maintaining, was fanned out over the pillow. I stood at the foot of the bed. I was still in my work clothes, smelling of wet earth, diesel, and sweat. I looked at her. 15 years. I remembered the day we met. I remembered the day Leo was born. I waited to feel the rage. I waited to feel the urge to wake her up and scream, to throw the phone in her face. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange clinical detachment. I was looking at a liability. I was looking at a component that had failed its load test. She shifted in her sleep, murmuring something soft. A hand reached out to the empty space where I should have been. I stepped back. I didn't want to save this. You don't patch a foundation that has cracked all the way through. You condemn the structure. I quietly picked up my spare pillow from the chair in the corner. I turned around and walked out. 6 a.m. The kitchen island is granite. Cold, hard, durable. I sat there with a fresh cup of coffee and the iPad. I had the address. Skyline Lofts, Penthouse 4. I logged into the Chamber of Commerce database. I have access because Vance Excavation is a member in good standing. I searched the address. Registered mailing address, Thorne Development Group. Principal owner, Julian Thorne. I stopped breathing for a second. Julian Thorne. I knew him. Not well, but I knew him. He was the developer on the strip mall project I cleared last year. I closed my eyes and the image of him appeared instantly. He was a man in a navy blue suit that cost more than my truck. He had soft hands. Hands that had never held a shovel, never turned a wrench, never bled unless he got a paper cut signing a check. He smelled like expensive cologne and money. I looked down at my own hands on the granite counter. The grease was still under my fingernails. My wedding band was scratched and dull from years of friction against steel levers. It made perfect sense. Jessica didn't just want an affair. She wanted an upgrade. She wanted the lifestyle I worked myself to death to provide, but she wanted it without the dirt. She wanted the finished building, not the construction site. She wanted the soft hands life. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot, bitter, and grounding. She thought I was just a dumb operator. She thought I was just the guy who moved dirt. She forgot that before you move the dirt, you have to survey the land. You have to know the laws. You have to know where the property lines are. And she had crossed the line. "All right about Julian," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "You want to play house? Let's talk zoning." August 16th, 2024, 6 a.m. The kitchen at 404 Ironwood Drive was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy, pressurized silence of a job site right before the blasting cap goes off. The only sounds were the hum of the stainless steel refrigerator and the aggressive bubbling of the coffee pot in the corner. I stood by the granite counter, granted I'd installed myself 3 years ago, watching Jessica. She was leaning against the sink, typing furiously on her phone. Her shoulders were hunched, tense, like she was protecting something fragile. I took a step forward. The floorboard creaked. Jessica flinched. She angled the screen away, sliding the phone into the pocket of her silk robe in one fluid, practiced motion. She turned to me, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The skin around her mouth was tight. "Work early again?" she asked. Her voice was thin, lacking warmth. I nodded, reaching for the pot. "Pouring footings for the new subdivision. Concrete trucks don't wait for sunrise." I poured the coffee black. It smelled burnt. I took a sip anyway. It tasted like rubber and ash, but it was grounding. "You'll be late tonight?" she asked, her eyes darting to the clock on the microwave, then back to me. She was calculating, measuring the window of opportunity. "Hard to say," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Depends on the ground. Sometimes you hit rock you didn't expect." I watched her for a second longer. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve, avoiding eye contact. The physical manifestation of betrayal. She wasn't looking at her husband. She was looking at an obstacle. I didn't confront her about the grub route notification from the Skyline Lofts. I didn't ask who ordered the spicy tuna roll 2 days ago. I just drank my burnt coffee, put on my high-vis vest, and walked out the door. August 16th, 2024, 10:30 a.m. The cab of my pickup truck was an oven, even with the AC blasting. I was parked on the edge of the site, the engine idling to keep the compressor running. Outside, the world was red clay and diesel fumes. Inside, it was just me and the numbers. I wasn't a hacker. I didn't know how to clone phones or break into encrypted chats, but I knew how to audit a ledger. I pulled up the joint checking account on my phone. We used a regional bank, old school, the kind that still gives you detailed paper trails if you ask. I scrolled back to July. Jessica had a spending allowance. We agreed on it years ago, but the cash withdrawals, those were new. July 12th, $200, ATM on 4th and Main. July 19th, $300, ATM on 4th and Main. July 26th, $200, ATM on 4th and Main. I tapped the map app. 4th and Main was 2 blocks from the Skyline Lofts. It was sloppy. That was the thing that insulted me the most. It wasn't just the dishonesty, it was the lack of effort. She thought I was too stupid to look at the coordinates. She thought because my hands were covered in grease, my brain was slow. I took a screenshot of every transaction. My thumb hovered over the screen, calloused, stained with hydraulic fluid, contrasting with the clean digital evidence of my marriage dissolving. I felt a cold resolve settling in my chest, replacing the initial shock I'd felt days ago. It was the same feeling I got when a blueprint didn't match the terrain. You don't yell at the dirt, you re-engineer the foundation. August 17th, 2024. I called Elias Mercer the next afternoon. The Bluetooth connection in the truck was clear, cutting through the background roar of a compactor, flattening the earth nearby. "Frank," Elias said. He sounded tired. "Please tell me you're not calling about the zoning dispute on the crushing yard." "No," I said, shifting gears. The transmission whined. "I need you to pull the deed for Ironwood." A pause. "Your house? Frank, that's a marital asset. If you're thinking about selling—" "I'm not selling," I interrupted. "I need you to check the transfer date, 2015, when I moved the title to Vance Excavation and Hauling LLC. "I remember," Elias said slowly. "We did it for liability protection. In case a wall collapsed on a job site, they couldn't take your home." "Exactly," I said. "So legally it's not a home. It's a corporate asset held by the LLC." "Technically, yes, but you and Jessica live there." "A judge would argue." "Elias," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "I need to reinforce that status. I want to designate specific areas of the property as commercial zones, office space, storage. I want the paperwork to reflect that the residential aspect is secondary to the business operation." Silence on the line. Elias was sharp. He knew I wasn't talking about tax write-offs. "Frank," he said carefully, "is everything okay at home?" "I'm just restructuring, Elias. Every structure has a load-bearing limit. I think we just exceeded ours." I hung up before he could ask anything else. August 19th, 2024. Dinner was suffocating. We sat at the round oak table. Leo, my 10-year-old, was pushing peas around his plate, building a little green dam against the mashed potatoes. Maya, 7, was kicking her legs under the table, the rhythmic thump, 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 the only real noise in the room. Jessica sighed loudly. She dropped her fork onto the ceramic plate. The clatter made Leo jump. "We need to fix the guest house," she announced. I chewed my steak slowly. It was overcooked. "The garage apartment?" "It's a guest house, Frank," she corrected, her tone sharp. "And it's rotting. If you're going to be working these overnight shifts, I need a space for hobbies, yoga, a studio." I looked at her, really looked at her. Jessica hadn't exercised since 2018. She didn't own a yoga mat. "Material costs are high right now," I said, cutting another piece of meat. "Lumber is up 20%. She rolled her eyes. "You always say that. You have money for excavators. You just bought that new cat unit. But when it comes to your family—" She let the sentence hang there, dripping with manufactured victimhood. "The excavator makes money, Jessica. A yoga studio doesn't. It's for my mental health," she snapped. "I'm suffocating in this house, Frank. I need a sanctuary." She didn't want a sanctuary. She wanted a private space detached from the main house, a place with a separate entrance, a place where a visitor could come and go without tripping the alarms in the main hallway. I wiped my mouth with a napkin. "I'll look at the budget." She smiled then, a triumphant little smirk. She thought she'd worn me down. She had no idea I was already drafting the eviction notice in my head. August 21st, 2024. Elias Mercer's office smelled like lemon polish and old paper. It was a stark contrast to the diesel and mud I lived in. I sat in the leather chair, feeling out of place in my work boots, even though I'd scrubbed them clean. Elias spread the operating agreement for Vance Excavation and Hauling LLC on his mahogany desk. "Okay," Elias said, adjusting his glasses. He looked nervous. "If we designate the master bedroom as Corporate Office Suite B and the detached garage, the guest house, as Storage Depot 4. We can argue the primary function of the property is commercial mixed use under zoning variance 44B. Good, I said. But Frank, Elias leaned forward, for this to hold up in court, you need to physically occupy it as such. You can't just say it's an office. It has to look like one, act like one. It will, I said. And Jessica, if she's living there, she's not on the deed, Elias. The LLC is. She's a distinct legal entity. Elias took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. You're turning your wife into a tenant at will. No, I said, standing up. I'm protecting the company assets from unauthorized personnel. This wasn't about saving the marriage anymore. That was gone. Burned to the ground the moment she ordered sushi to the Skyline Lofts. This was about the kids. If I lost the house in a messy divorce, Leo and Maya would lose their stability. I wasn't fighting for the drywall. I was fighting for their childhood. August 23rd, 2024, 11 p.m. The house was dark. Jessica was asleep upstairs, or pretending to be. I walked out to the detached garage. We called it the guest house, but it was really just a converted storage unit with plumbing and a kitchenette. I unlocked the side door. The air inside was stale, but underneath the dust, I smelled something sharp. Fresh paint. I flipped on the light. The back wall, the one facing away from the main house, was painted a soft, calming blue. Seafoam mist, if I had to guess. I walked over and ran my hand along the wall. It was still tacky, wet. She hadn't waited for my approval. She hadn't waited for the budget. She'd used the joint account, my money, to buy paint for a room she planned to use with Julian Thorne. I looked at the floor. There were drop cloths neatly arranged. A roller tray sat in the corner. The audacity of it was almost impressive. She was nesting, building a little hideaway for her lover on my land, funded by my labor. I turned off the light and locked the door. My hands weren't shaking. They were steady as rock. August 24th, 2024. Saturday. A rare moment of relief. I took Leo and Maya for ice cream at the spot downtown, the one with the retro neon sign. For an hour, the world wasn't about lawyers or zoning laws or infidelity. It was just sticky fingers and vanilla cones. Dad, look! Leo pointed at a dog across the street, a golden retriever tugging on its leash. Can we get a dog? Like that one. Maybe, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. Requires a lot of responsibility. I'd walk him, Maya chirped, ice cream dripping down her chin. Every day. I wiped her face with a napkin, my touch gentle. These hands could crush rock, but they could be soft when they needed to be. I watched them. Leo laughing as the dog barked, Maya swinging her legs on the bench. If I let Jessica win, if I let her play the victim and take half the assets, this disappears. She'd sell the house. She'd move them into some condo complex while she chased her soul connection with Julian. Julian, who lived in a penthouse where kids probably weren't allowed to touch the glass. I wasn't the villain here. I was the structural engineer trying to keep the roof from collapsing on my children's heads. August 25th, 2024, Sunday night. Jessica was pushing hard. My friend recommended a contractor, she said, cornering me in the living room. She wouldn't look me in the eye. He can start on the guest house tomorrow. He's very discreet. I knew the friend, and I knew the contractor. It was Julian Thorne. He was a developer. He probably had subs he could call in, or maybe he planned to play handyman himself to get access to the property. I'll handle the renovations myself, I said, not looking up from my iPad. I was reviewing the security protocols for the equipment yard. You never have time, she cried, throwing her hands up. The bracelets on her wrist jingled. "You're always working!" "I can do it next month." Her face fell. Genuine panic flashed in her eyes. "Next month? But you're leaving for the highway job on Tuesday. You'll be gone for a week." There it was, the deadline. She needed the space ready now because she planned to move him in while I was 2 counties over. She wanted to play house with Julian in my backyard while I was out earning the mortgage payments. "Sorry, Jess," I said, standing up. "Schedule is tight." She stormed out of the room. I waited until I heard the bedroom door slam. Then I went to the garage and grabbed my label maker. August 27th, 2024, Tuesday. Departure day. I packed my duffel bag methodically. Heavy work shirts, steel-toe socks, a fresh block of soap. I moved like I was preparing for a deployment. I stopped at the master bedroom door. Jessica was downstairs, making a show of being angry, clattering dishes in the sink. I took a laminated piece of paper out of my bag. I taped it to the doorframe of our bedroom. Vance Excavation, Suite B, authorized personnel only. I went downstairs. I taped another one to the door of the guest house. Storage Depot 4, no unauthorized access. Jessica walked into the hallway, wiping her hands on a towel. She stopped, staring at the sign on the bedroom door. She let out a short, nervous laugh. "Is this a joke, Frank?" "Tax audit prep," I lied smoothly. I didn't blink. "Elias says we need to demarcate the commercial zones physically. Don't remove them or we get fined. The IRS doesn't play games." She stared at me. She didn't know anything about tax law or corporate structure. She viewed business as a boring, magical box that spat out money. "Fine," she muttered. "Whatever keeps your precious company safe." "It will," I said. I picked up my bag. "I'll see you in a week." I didn't kiss her goodbye. I just walked out to the truck. August 28th, 2024. The job site was 2 hours north, deep in the timberland. It was night. The floodlights cut through the swirling dust, creating cones of white in the darkness. It was 2 a.m. I sat in the cab of my excavator. The engine was off, but the electrical systems were live. I wasn't digging. I was watching. I propped my iPad up on the control levers. The screen glowed with a grainy black and white feed. Earlier that week, I'd installed a new security camera on the equipment shed back home. It faced the driveway. Legally, I was monitoring my business assets, the skid steer and the trailer I kept parked there. If the camera happened to catch the driveway and the guest house entrance, well, that was just collateral visibility. I sat there in the dark, sipping cold coffee, waiting. The isolation of the cab felt like a bunker. I was a general waiting for the enemy to cross the line. August 29th, 2024. The feed flickered. Motion detected. A car pulled into the driveway of 404 Ironwood Drive. It wasn't my truck. It was a sleek black sedan. I pinched the screen to zoom in. A BMW. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Even in the grainy footage, the cut of the suit was obvious. Julian Thorne. He looked ridiculous standing on the cracked concrete of my driveway, surrounded by my oil stains. He walked to the trunk and pulled out an overnight bag. Then, the back door of the main house opened. Jessica ran out. She wasn't wearing her usual guarded expression. She was smiling, beaming. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. I watched, my face stone. No tears, no screaming. She took his hand and led him, not to the front door, but toward the detached guest house. Storage Depot 4. The audio on the camera was faint, but it picked up her laugh. It was a sound I hadn't heard in 5 years. Light, carefree. They stopped at the door. Jessica fumbled with a key I hadn't given her. She must have had a copy made. They stepped inside. The door closed. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Jessica. I didn't drive home to put a tire iron through the BMW's windshield. I dialed Elias Mercer's voicemail. "Elias," I said. My voice was calm, matching the hum of the distant generator. "Execute the eviction notice. We have an unauthorized occupant in Commercial Storage Unit 4, and draft the tenant at will contract for Jessica." I hung up. I watched the closed door of the guest house on the screen. I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a landlord dealing with a lease violation. I turned the key in the ignition. The massive diesel engine of the Cat 336 roared to life, shaking the cab, drowning out the silence. I had work to do. August 30th, almost midnight. The cab of the Hitachi 350 Excavator smelled like stale coffee, hydraulic grease, and the cheap pine air freshener I'd bought 3 months ago. It was a small glass box suspended 20 feet above the mud, isolated from the rest of the world by rain and steel. I sat there, engine idling, the vibration humming through the seat and into my spine. My phone sat on the console next to the joystick. The screen was dark, but the image burned in my mind like a welding arc. A screenshot. Grubroot order number 4492. Delivered 8:14 p.m. Total $142.50. Merchant, Oishi Sushi. Jessica hated sushi, said the texture made her gag. But the delivery address wasn't 404 Ironwood Drive. It was the Skyline Lofts, Penthouse 4. I knew that address. Everyone in construction knew that address. It was the premier luxury rental in the city, and I knew who lived there because I'd seen the lease applications when my company hauled the debris for their parking garage renovation. Julian Thorne. I looked out at the job site. The floodlights cut through the drizzle, illuminating the raw, torn-up earth. It was ugly work, messy, but there was a logic to it. You apply force, the earth moves. You build a foundation, the structure stands. Marriage wasn't like that. I'd built the foundation. I'd poured the concrete, reinforced it with rebar, worked 80-hour weeks to make sure the walls never cracked. And Jessica? She was taking a sledgehammer to the load-bearing beams because she was bored with the paint color. I tapped the screen. The map showed the delivery route. While I was here, moving tons of wet clay to pay for her Audi and her Pilates classes, she was eating spicy tuna rolls with a commercial real estate developer who probably had hands as soft as Wonder Bread. I didn't cry. I don't do that. Instead, I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my chest. It was the same feeling I got when a hydraulic line blew, a sudden drop in pressure, then the realization that everything was about to get very expensive and very messy. I gripped the joystick. My knuckles were white, stained with grease that never really washed off. "Okay," I whispered to the empty cab. "Okay." I slammed the throttle. The diesel engine roared, a deep, guttural scream that drowned out the rain. I swung the boom, the bucket tearing into the ground with violent precision. I buried the anger. I buried the hurt. I put it all under 6 feet of heavy, wet soil. September 1st, 10 a.m. The humidity was suffocating. It was one of those mornings where the air felt heavy, like a wet wool blanket. I was down in the pit, checking the grade on the drainage trench, wiping sweat and fluid from my forehead with a rag that was already black with grime. "Yo, boss!" One of my guys, Miller, shouted from the bank. "Someone here for you." I looked up. A man in a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit was picking his way through the ruts, trying not to ruin his loafers in the mud. He looked out of place, like a plastic fork at a steak dinner. He was holding a large manila envelope. My stomach dropped. I knew what this was. I'd seen it happen to other guys on the crew. I climbed out of the trench, my boots sucking loudly in the mud. I didn't rush. I wiped my hands on my pants, leaving dark smears on the heavy canvas. "Frank Vance?" the man asked. He looked nervous. He should be. He was standing in the middle of a heavy equipment zone with a man twice his size. "Yeah," I said. My voice sounded like gravel in a mixer. He thrust the envelope at my chest. He didn't make eye contact. "You've been served." He turned and scrambled back toward his sedan before I could even grip the paper. Silence ripples fast on a job site. The saws stopped. The generators hummed, but the banter died. I looked around. Miller was suddenly very interested in his shovel. The new kid was staring at his boots. They knew. The public humiliation settled over me like wet concrete, heavy and setting fast. I walked to my pickup truck, the envelope burning my hand. I climbed in, cranked the engine, and blasted the AC. I needed the noise. I needed the cold. I tore the envelope open. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The legal language was precise, clinical, and completely detached from reality. Jessica was asking for everything. Primary custody of Leo and Maya. Spousal support calculated on my gross revenue, not net income, which was insane. And then, there it was. Paragraph 4. Exclusive possession of the marital residence located at 404 Ironwood Drive. And the reason? Constructive abandonment due to excessive work hours. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like a piston misfiring. Constructive abandonment. I worked those hours to pay for the roof she wanted. I worked those hours to pay for the private school for Leo and the dance lessons for Maya. I was rarely home because the lifestyle she demanded required a constant influx of cash. I was the engine room of the Titanic, and she was complaining about the noise while she drank champagne on the deck. I looked at the dashboard. There was a photo taped near the speedometer. Leo and Maya at the lake last summer. Leo holding a fish, Maya grinning with missing front teeth. The rage flared up, hot and blinding. I wanted to drive this truck straight through the front door of 404 Ironwood. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. I wanted to burn it all down. My hand shook as I reached for my phone. I was going to call her. I was going to beg, or maybe threaten. I didn't know. I just wanted the pain to stop. My thumb hovered over the screen. I saw my wallpaper. It wasn't a family photo. It was the logo of Vance Excavation and Hauling LLC. Simple, stark, black letters on yellow. Something clicked. It was like a breaker tripping in my brain. The emotion, the hurt, the betrayal, the fear, it just cut out. The circuit went dead. What was left was cold, mechanical logic. This wasn't a marriage anymore. This was a failing contract. This was a liability that needed to be liquidated. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I didn't go home. I put the truck in gear and headed downtown. The office of Elias Mercer smelled of mahogany, old paper, and money. It was quiet here. No diesel engines, no mud. Just the soft tick of a grandfather clock and the rustle of documents. Elias was my corporate attorney. He specialized in zoning law and commercial assets. He looked like he was born wearing a vest, thin, sharp, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. I threw the divorce petition on his pristine oak desk. It landed with a heavy slap. "She wants the house, Elias," I said. I didn't sit down. I paced the room, my work boots leaving faint impressions on his Persian rug. Elias adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and picked up the document. He scanned it quickly, his face impassive. "Standard boilerplate," he muttered. "She's claiming the house is the primary marital asset. She wants you out immediately to establish stability for the children." "She can want the moon," I said, stopping by the window. "But she's suing me. Frank Vance, the individual. Elias looked up, a glint of understanding in his eyes. And Frank Vance doesn't own the house. Exactly. I turned to face him. A grim smile touched my lips. It felt tight, unnatural. She thinks she married a husband, Elias. She forgot she married a business partner. She forgot about 2015. Elias stood up and walked to the filing cabinet. He pulled a thick file labeled Vance Excavation and Hauling, LLC. He spread the blueprints and deeds across the desk. Zoning variance 44B, Elias said, tracing a blue line on the map. When you bought the land, it was zoned commercial/light industrial. You built the house, but we designated the structure as a mixed-use facility to store the heavy equipment on site. He tapped the master bedroom on the blueprint. We designated this area as Corporate Office Suite B, Elias said. You write off the square footage every year. The kitchen is the employee break room. The garage is Maintenance Bay 1. And the deed? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Held by the LLC, Elias confirmed. Frank Vance is an employee of the LLC. Jessica Vance is, well, legally speaking, she's a squatter, or at best, a tenant at will. If she kicks me out, I said, my voice flat. She's evicting the CEO from his headquarters. That interferes with business operations. Correct. Elias sat back, tenting his fingers. And if she stays, she's a tenant, I finished. A tenant without a lease. I leaned over the desk. Drafted, Elias. Not a response to family court. I want a commercial property notification, notice of lease violation, and an eviction warning for unauthorized occupants. Elias pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. He actually smiled. It was a shark's smile. I'll bill the company account. September 1st, 6 p.m. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and washed clean. I pulled into the driveway of 404 Ironwood Drive. The house looked perfect, manicured lawn, warm light spilling from the windows. It looked like a home. It wasn't. It was an asset. I walked to the front door. I didn't wipe my boots. I opened the door and stepped inside. Jessica was in the kitchen. She was humming. She had a glass of white wine in her hand, and she was leaning against the island, scrolling on her phone. She looked relieved. She thought the hard part was over. She thought she'd fired the first shot and won the war. She looked up, and her smile faltered when she saw me. Her eyes darted to my boots. I tracked a trail of red clay across the pristine hardwood floor. Frank, she said, her voice tight. You can't just walk in here. My lawyer said once you're served, you should. I live here, Jessica, I said. I didn't yell. I didn't sound angry. I sounded like I was explaining a safety violation to a rookie. I walked to the kitchen island. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the document Elias and I had spent 3 hours drafting. It was thick, heavy. I dropped it on top of her divorce papers. The thud echoed in the silence. I spoke to Elias, is all I said. Jessica frowned. She put down her wine glass. Who? Your zoning guy? What does he have to do with our divorce? She picked up the document. Her eyes scanned the header. Notice of commercial lease violation and tenant at will agreement. She looked up, confused. What is this? Is this a joke? I walked to the sink and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. You sued Frank Vance, but Frank Vance doesn't own this house. Vance Excavation and Hauling LLC does. You've been living in a mixed-use commercial facility since 2015. I took a sip. Cool. Clean. According to the company bylaws, I continued, reciting the text we just reviewed, non-employee residents are subject to board approval. I am the board. Jessica laughed. It was a high-pitched, nervous sound. That's ridiculous, Frank. This is our home. The judge will laugh at you. You can't just declare our house a business. It's zoned light industrial, Jess, I said, leaning back against the counter. Look at the tax returns you signed for the last 8 years. We depreciated the roof as a business expense. We wrote off the home office deduction. You signed those forms. Her face paled slightly. She remembered the tax refunds. She loved the tax refunds. She just never asked where they came from. Since you filed for divorce, I said, your status as a dependent family member is void. You are now a tenant at will. Rent is calculated at market value for commercial office space in this district. I paused. It's due on the 1st. Jessica stared at me, her mouth slightly open. She was trying to process it, trying to find the emotional angle, but there wasn't one. This was math. This was law. And Clause 4, I said, dropping the second bomb. No unauthorized occupants. I looked her dead in the eyes. That includes Julian Thorne. She froze. The color drained from her face completely. Her hand knocked against the wine glass, sending it wobbling. If Julian sets foot on this property, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth, it's not a domestic dispute. It's criminal trespassing on a secure commercial site. I'll have him arrested and the vehicle towed. We have heavy machinery on site. Liability insurance doesn't cover boyfriends. You can't, she stammered. I have rights. I have money. I have... She stopped. You have the credit cards I pay for, I corrected her. I pulled out my phone. I opened the banking app. Provider shutdown initiated, I muttered. I tapped the screen. Freeze card. Freeze joint checking. Transfer savings to corporate holding. Jessica's phone, sitting on the counter, lit up. Ping, ping, ping. She looked down. Notifications were flooding her screen. Transaction declined. Netflix subscription. Alert. Joint account frozen. Alert. Credit limit reduced to $0. She looked up at me, terror finally replacing the arrogance in her eyes. Frank, what did you do? I'm protecting the company assets, I said. Emotions don't pay the mortgage, Jessica. Equity does. And right now, you're a liability. I put my phone in my pocket. I felt lighter. The crushing weight of the betrayal was still there, but now it was manageable. It was just another load to haul. Rent is due in 30 days, I said, walking toward the guest room door. Don't be late. I closed the door behind me, leaving her standing in the dark kitchen with her frozen accounts and her shaking hands. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and listened. For a long time there was silence. Then I heard the sound of glass shattering against the floor. It had begun. It was Tuesday, September 3rd, just after 2 in the afternoon. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the construction site a churning sea of gray mud and standing water. I was sitting high in the cab of the Komatsu 336, the diesel engine vibrating through the base of my spine, a steady, low-frequency hum that usually calmed me. Not today. My phone was mounted on the dashboard, right next to the grade control monitor. It started buzzing around 2:15 p.m. I didn't need to look to know what it was, but I glanced anyway. Bank of America alert. Transaction declined. Whole Foods, $248.50. Bank of America alert. Transaction declined. Shell Station, $65. I kept my hands on the joysticks. The bucket curled, tearing into the wet clay, carving out the drainage trench for the new industrial park. The hydraulics hissed, a sound like a snake striking. Buzz, buzz. She was trying the credit cards now. I felt a cold, heavy weight in my chest, but it wasn't panic. It was the feeling of setting a steel beam. Once you let go of the crane cable, gravity takes over. There's no stopping it. 10 minutes later, I saw the white Range Rover turn off the paved access road. She was driving too fast for the conditions. The SUV hit the soft loam near the side entrance, the tires spinning uselessly as the traction control system panicked. Mud sprayed up the pristine white side panels. She gunned it, digging herself deeper. I throttled down. The roar of the engine dropped to a rhythmic idle. Jessica stepped out. The contrast was offensive. She was wearing beige slacks and those Italian leather heels she'd bought last month, on my dime. As soon as her foot touched the ground, she sank 3 inches into the muck. She stumbled, grabbing the door frame, her face twisted in a look I'd never seen before. It wasn't just anger, it was terror. She slammed the door and started marching toward the excavator, waving her phone in the air. She was screaming something, but the safety glass and the engine noise turned it into a silent movie. I watched her for a moment. This was the woman who had shared my bed for 12 years, the mother of Leo and Maya. And now, she was just an obstruction on my job site. I unlatched the door and climbed down the steel rungs. My boots hit the ground with a heavy thud. I was covered in dust and hydraulic grease. She was manicured, perfumed, and trembling. "You froze everything!" she shrieked, closing the distance. She slipped on a patch of clay, flailing to stay upright. "My cards, the joint account, everything! I'm standing at the checkout line like an idiot."
"I can't even buy gas, Frank. Are you insane?"
I wiped my hands on a shop rag, taking my time. "I didn't freeze them, Jessica. I secured the assets." "Secured?" She laughed, a frantic, jagged sound. "You cut me off! That is my money too! We are married!" "We were," I said. My voice was flat. I sounded like I was reading a spec sheet. "Now we're just negotiating." I reached into the side compartment of the excavator track frame, where I kept my logbooks, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. The edges were crisp against the dirty metal. "You're not staying at 404 Ironwood Drive tonight," I said. She froze. The wind whipped her hair across her face, sticking to her lip gloss. "Excuse me? That is my house. You can't kick me out of my own home, Frank. I have rights. I'll call the police." "It's not your home," I corrected her. "It's corporate office suite B." I handed her the envelope. She snatched it, tearing it open with shaking hands. "According to the deed transfer we filed in 2015, I continued, reciting the words Elias Mercer had drilled into me. "The property is owned entirely by Vance Excavation and Hauling LLC. You signed the spousal waiver. You remember? I told you it was to protect the house from liability lawsuits if I ever hit a gas line." She stared at the paper. It wasn't a divorce petition. It was a formal notice to vacate commercial premises. "You are not a shareholder in the company," I said, leaning back against the muddy tracks of the machine. "Legally speaking, you are a guest, a transient occupant." Her eyes darted up from the paper, wide and wet. This is crazy. Judges don't care about this technical crap, Frank. It's a marital home." "Is it?" I pointed to the second paragraph. "Check zoning variance 44B. The property is zoned mixed-use industrial. I pay commercial property tax rates on it. I write off the square footage. It's an asset, Jessica, just like this excavator, just like the dump trucks." I took a step closer. She smelled like rain and expensive vanilla lotion. "And you've been using company assets to entertain a competitor." She flinched. "What?" "Julian Thorne," I said. The name tasted like ash in my mouth. "He's a developer. In the eyes of the LLC, he's an unauthorized occupant conducting business on company property. If he sets foot on the driveway again, I'll have him arrested for criminal trespassing and corporate espionage." Jessica crumbled. The fight drained out of her, replaced by the crushing reality of the paperwork. She looked at the excavator, then at the mud covering her shoes. The fantasy world she'd built with Julian, the luxury lofts, the sushi dinners, the soft hands. It all evaporated. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered, her voice cracked. "Leo and Maya. Frank, you can't take my children." My chest tightened. That was the only part of this that actually hurt. "I'm not taking them," I said softly. "They stay in their home. They stay in their school. The question is whether you stay with them." I pulled the second document from the envelope. "This is a tenant at will agreement." She looked at it, confused. "It outlines your role," I explained. "Live-in caretaker. You get room and board, utilities paid, no monthly allowance, no credit cards. You run the house, you cook the meals, you raise our children." I paused, looking her dead in the eye. "And you end the affair. Today." She stared at the contract. Her hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled. It was humiliating. I was offering her a job. I was hiring her to be my wife. "And if I don't sign?" she asked, tears spilling over. "Then you leave," I said. "I've already spoken to Elias. Since the house is corporate property and you have zero income, custody will legally default to the parent with the stable residence and financial means. That's me. You'll get visitation every other weekend, assuming you can find an apartment with no credit history." She looked at me with pure hatred. "You planned this, you sociopath." "I audited," I said. "Call him." "Who?" "Julian, call him." I nodded toward her phone. "See if he wants a roommate with no money, 2 kids, and a hostile corporate zoning attorney breathing down his neck. See if he loves you enough to fight a commercial litigation battle." She hesitated. Then, with a desperate, trembling finger, she dialed. I stood there, arms crossed, listening to the one-sided conversation. It was brutal. I watched her face fall. I watched the hope die. Julian Thorne lived in a penthouse. He managed risk for a living. He wasn't going to entangle himself in a messy legal war for a woman who was suddenly a liability. I could hear the tinny sound of his voice making excuses. Bad timing, complicated, need some space. Jessica lowered the phone slowly. The screen went dark. The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick like the wet clay under our feet. The wind kicked up, coating her Range Rover in a fine layer of grit. She looked at the mud on her shoes, then at me. "He's not coming," she whispered. "No," I said. "He's not." She looked at the tenant at will agreement. She looked at the pen I was holding out. "I hate you," she said. The venom was weak, diluted by exhaustion. "I know," I replied, "but you love Leo and Maya more. That's the only reason this offer exists." She took the pen. She pressed the document against the cold, yellow steel of the excavator track. The ink streaked slightly on the damp paper as she signed her name. Jessica Vance. She handed it back to me. She looked small, broken. "Go home, Jessica," I said, tucking the contract into my vest pocket. "Wash the mud off the floors. I'll be back at 6 for dinner. We're having chicken." I turned my back on her and climbed up the steel rungs. I didn't look down. I settled into the seat, fired up the engine, and throttled up. The roar drowned out her sobbing. By the time I pulled into the driveway at 404 Ironwood Drive, the sun was setting. I walked directly to the guest house. The door was unlocked. I went inside. It smelled like sandalwood cologne. His smell. I didn't throw things. I didn't break anything. I grabbed a cardboard box from the garage and methodically cleared the room. A shaver, a few shirts, a pair of loafers. I packed them with the same efficiency I used to load gravel. I carried the box to the end of the driveway and set it by the curb. The garbage truck came on Wednesday mornings. When I walked into the main house, corporate office suite B, the smell of roasted chicken hit me. The floor was spotless. The mud was gone. I walked into the dining room. Leo and Maya were already at the table. "Daddy!" Maya squealed, jumping up. She ran over and hugged my leg. I looked down at her, forcing a smile onto my face. It felt stiff, like dried concrete. "Hey, sweetie," I said, patting her hair. My hands were scrubbed raw, but I could still see the grease under my fingernails. Jessica walked in from the kitchen holding a serving platter. She had changed into jeans and a sweater. Her face was fresh, makeup reapplied, but her eyes were dead, empty. "Dinner is ready," she said. Her voice was hollow. I sat at the head of the table. Jessica sat opposite me. "So, Leo," I said, unfolding my napkin, "how was practice?" "Good," Leo said, grabbing a roll. "Coach said I'm starting on Saturday." "That's great, buddy," I said. We ate. The kids chattered happily about school, about cartoons, about the weekend. They didn't see the invisible wall that ran right through the center of the table. They didn't know that their mother was a tenant and their father was her landlord. I chewed the chicken,